This next segment, John and Ocean Robbins. John Robbins could have inherited the Baskin-Robbins fortune and empire, but he walked away from all the money and the power. Why? Why? He simply didn't want to devote his life to selling ice cream after realizing it makes people unhealthy. So he decided to make a change. Over the past 25 years, his books about healthy eating and healthy living, including the bestseller Diet for a New America, have sold millions of copies and been translated into over 30 languages. Ocean, his son, was born in a log cabin built by his parents and grew up eating food they grew together. At age 16, Ocean co-founded an organization called YES, Youth for Environmental Sanity, that he directed for the next 20 years. YES has reached more than 650,000 students in school assemblies and organized seminars and gatherings for leaders from more than 65 countries. Ocean's work took him all over the world, where he saw firsthand the powerful impact of the food we eat, not just on our health, but on people and economies everywhere. Together, this father and son duo are Cape Crusaders without a cape, and they are really beautiful, wonderful people. We wouldn't be here were it not for John Robbins. None of this would exist. He's the guy that started it all for us, and we aspire to be just like them someday when we grow up. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John and Ocean Robbins.
Thank you, Jeff, and Sabrina, and the rest of the Nelson clan, and all of you. I really do want to acknowledge you, your presence here, your attention, the energy you bring to this has implications, has consequences, and that sometimes can be underestimated. When we change our lives, when we bring them into alignment with what truly gives us health and contributes to the healing of our world, of our society, of our communities, we become agents of something. We become vehicles of something. We become receptive to and responsible for something. And that something has a magic to it. It has a beauty to it. It has a soul. It's the spirit of our interconnection with life. It's the spirit of our vitality, of our chi, of our energy, of our capacity to make a difference, regardless of how difficult or challenging the circumstances may be. It's our capacity to respond to the anguish and the deterioration and the breakdown from a place that's positive, that's creative, that is resilient, that's sourced in who we really are, and what our real possibilities and opportunities are. And so I want to acknowledge you for being here and for taking the steps that you've taken to be where you are right now, which is in an evolving process that will lead you further. And I want to acknowledge you for the courage and the honesty that it takes, because we live in a society, as you well know, that is pulling us all the time in a different direction. I call it the cultural trance. It's a type of hypnosis almost, in which our thinking is squelched. Our sense of who we are as human beings is restricted. And our capacity to respond in an energetic and powerful and passionate and compassionate way is diminished. We are taught that we're separate from each other. We're taught that we're separate from the animals and the plants and the trees and the oceans and the rivers and the earth itself. And in that excommunication, in that alienation that is indoctrinated to us, is imposed on us, we become insecure. We become frightened because we're no longer rooted. We're no longer aware of, responsive to, and expressing the responsibilities, the maturity of that connection. So as we reawaken to who we really are and to our capacity to respond and to our health and to our healing choices, we are taken along in an adventure. It is mysterious at times. It is magical at times. It is heartbreaking at times. But we have each other. We have a wisdom that is being brought forth, enlarged in us by the actions we take, by the knowledge we gain, and by the witness that we bring to what is taking place in our hearts and with each other. And out of it, something brilliant, something beyond our individual capacity to conceive is emerging, is taking place, will be revealed. You know, in AA, in the 12-step programs, there's a phrase that's used a lot, more will be revealed. And it's a mantra for me. More will be revealed. Not in the sense that I feel what we know now isn't great and isn't wonderful and beautiful, but in the sense that there is this opening taking place in the mind when it's teachable. And there's this capacity to learn more and become even more potent and effective. I don't know exactly what Ocean and I are going to talk about and how we're going to go about it, but I know it's going to be fun, and I know it's going to have something to do with healing and with unconditional love and our capacity to respond to one another and live with respect for ourselves and each other. I want to pass the mic in a moment to my dearly beloved son and colleague, Ocean Robbins, who's 38 years old, and my wife, Deo, and his mom, and I have been together for 45 years. And we often say to each other, and we totally agree about this, that when we got Ocean, we won the lottery. And I think you're going to see why. And to be his father has been the greatest privilege of my life. And it has been, I've learned so much about what really matters in the heart of things. And I now get to work with him in the Food Revolution Network, which he will talk about, please. And now I get to share him with you, which is truly a joy.
Thank you so much. It is an incredible joy to be with all of you. I was just thinking that it could be a little intimidating to speak with John Robbins. Some people might compare it, at a vegetarian conference, people might compare it to like speaking with the Pope at a Catholic conference or something. And yet for me, it also feels like being very at home, because my dad, before he wrote Diet for New America, he was the same man he is today, which is a human being trying to live his conscience, his values as best he could in this world, and hopefully to be able to share whatever he learns with others along the way. And to grow up in the home in which I grew up, in which we had dinner time conversations about things like the state of our world and our dreams and our prayers and where we were struggling and what we were hoping to accomplish, not just in our own personal lives, but for this planet. We talked about war and peace when I was about 7. We were talking about what we could learn from the history of violence that humanity has endured and how we could create a future that was different than that history when I was about 8. And I organized a peace rally in my elementary school. We were talking about food choices, so I started a natural foods bakery called Ocean's Bakery, sold baked goods door to door around the neighborhood. When I was 10, I was on the front page of the local newspaper. It said, "Boy isn't very rich, but he's got dough." I sometimes felt a sense of responsibility that came with my unique upbringing. having parents that raised me from an early age to feel that my life had a purpose greater than myself, having a sense that my life had a purpose that wanted to touch this whole world, I sometimes felt a bit of weight on my shoulders, and that also was touched because my dad used to say to me time and again, "I'm proud of you for all your accomplishments, and I'd love you just as much if you were autistic." And that had particular meaning to me more recently as my wife and I had children 11 years ago, identical twin boys who are autistic. And so I'm learning about unconditional love, and I get to ask myself, can I love them just as much the way they are? Fully and completely, not for what they accomplish, not for all the things they may do in this life, but because every human being, every soul deserves unconditional, total, and complete love. And it is that love that I have been raised with, and that love that I seek to live in my own life. My dad and I have a lot in common, as you might have guessed already, in terms of values and passions and dreams and commitment. We have one thing very different about us. We grew up in very different homes. My dad grew up in a home where children were to be seen and not heard. Around the dinner table, children were not to speak unless they were spoken to. They were commanded, they were told what to do, and they were punished or rewarded accordingly. And he grew up in a home where money was really the measure of success. I grew up in a home where we talked about love and we hugged each other, and I was really encouraged to live my values. I remember my grandparents feeling a little concerned about how their grandson was being raised, and very eagerly bringing me down for a visit when I was about 11 and telling me, not every child goes the same way as their parents. Your father didn't. Maybe you won't. And they told me if ever you want to do something different than your parents, we just want you to know we're here to help you. And I had this image at the time, I was a Star Wars fan, and I had this image of, Darth Vader talking to Luke, saying, Luke, come to the dark side. But seriously, I don't really believe in dark sides and light sides. I believe that the line between good and evil runs through every human heart. And ultimately, I think that one of the beautiful stories in our family has been that my grandfather, although he was horrified by many of my dad's choices, and I saw that firsthand through my childhood too, in time came around in some remarkable ways. And we were with him on his deathbed a couple of years ago. As he was saying, thank God some of us lived long enough to learn a few new things. And, I felt his love for both of us and his blessing as we go forward in our work. And it meant a lot to me. So as we do this work to try to be agents of change in the world, to try to live in a good way, to try to be healthy, to try to contribute to the health of our planet and the people we love, it can be hard sometimes. We live in a country in the United States, for those of us who do live in the United States, where if you don't count pizza, ketchup, and French fries as vegetables, half of the people in this country consume no vegetables at all. We live in a country in the US here where 1 in 3 children is expected to develop diabetes in their lifetime, where the vast majority of our massive healthcare budget that's now consuming 21% of US GDP is going towards entirely preventable diseases. How many of you are from other countries than the United States? Wonderful. Thank you. So on a global level, we live in a context in which it is more and more farms have been getting squelched out as the big farms, industrialized agriculture has been taking over for the last 60 years. And just recently, we're starting to see the tide turn. In the last 3 years, we've seen more farms in the United States year over year than there were the year before. In the last decade, we've seen farmers' markets increase 4-fold. We've seen the consumption of organic foods increase 4-fold. We're watching a booming natural foods industry. Now, some of that can be a little iffy because sometimes things are called natural that maybe shouldn't be. It just means that somewhere along the way, the ingredients came from the earth. But I will say this, interest in health interest in local foods, interest in natural foods is growing very, very fast. And there's a reason for that. We're sick of being sick. We're tired of being tired. We see that what we're doing is not working. We have access today to more information about health and disease and what we eat and the relationship between them than any people in the history of the world. And bit by bit, piece by piece, more and more people are becoming activated, becoming engaged, saying, you know what, the status quo of genetically engineered pseudo-junk foods that they may have been developed by a marketing company to taste good, but they don't come from the real living earth in a way that our bodies can even recognize. Those days are coming to a close. The days of healthy, natural, wholesome food that nourishes our bodies, that is aligned with our spirits, that helps us to thrive and to live with vitality and joy, those days are coming. And we're part of creating what I call the food revolution. My dad wrote the book, The Food Revolution, about 12 years ago. And we're working together now with the Food Revolution Network. 45,000 people have joined in the last 6 months. And we're organizing for healthy, sustainable, humane, delicious food for everybody. And we're doing it primarily through online organizing, building communities that are accessible to everybody everywhere in the world. As much as possible, offering content and resources for free, to be able to help support communities and individuals in taking responsibility for our food and our lives, and reclaiming our food systems from the hands of commercial interests that have no agenda for our own health and well-being. We're reclaiming it so that we can live and eat and nourish our bodies in a way that is truly of beneficence to who we want to be and the lives we want to live and the future we're stepping into. So you might imagine I grew up talking about food quite a bit. My dad wrote Diet for New America in 1987, 25 years ago. In fact, the 25th anniversary edition is coming out in a couple of months. And he quickly came to be on all these national talk shows, and the media was calling him the rebel without a cone, for obvious reasons, and talking about how he followed his own rocky road and was the prophet of nonprofit. We talked about food a lot, and have continued to through the years. And I've seen a lot change in the world of food, and I'm curious, since you wrote Diet for New America 25 years ago, what have you witnessed? What have you experienced? How has the food world changed in that time?
A lot. Wow. How has it changed in the last quarter century? There are so many more people aware now that for one thing, that modern meat production is cruel, that it's barbarically cruel, that it's an insult to the human-animal bond, that it's a violation of our sense of compassion, and that it's unnecessary. There are far more people aware now that the way we raise livestock, the way we produce modern meat, is an egregious waste of resources, of water, of land, of human labor, of all the inputs that make food production possible. And that if we want to see a world where everyone is fed, we have to eat lower on the food chain. It's a survival imperative. It's an ethical imperative, and it's an environmental imperative. More and more people are aware of the greenhouse gas emissions associated to modern meat production, to livestock raising. More and more people are aware of the water pollution that dairies and feedlots in general and factory farms in general emit, pollute. And more and more people are asking the deeper questions of they're willing to be different now. You know, there's a lot of people just willing to tattoo their skin or make their hair pink or do something to be different. And there's this sense growing, and it takes all kinds of different forms, some of them superficial, but some of them very profound, that to be ourselves, to be healthy, to be committed to what lives in our hearts and gave us our lives in the first place, means to deviate, to be different from the expectations that the culture imposes on us of who we're supposed to be. And I think that willingness, that courage to be who you are, to not play to other people's expectations and assumptions all the time, is an empowering thing. And it's growing. And it allows us to be who we are together. And there's an authenticity then, out of which we make choices, not because we are hitting ourselves over the head and criticizing ourselves and finding fault, but because we feel the possibility arising in our hearts, in our lives, in our actions. I see this everywhere I go. Now, I maybe have a skewed vision because people share with me these things, but I see people waking up to who they can be versus who they've been told they should be. And when they wake up to that, the instinct arises for health and healing and connection with others. And that's where I look for hope right now.
You've done a lot of work around this theme of connection. And you've actually started Diet for New America focusing on animals and the human-animal bond. And you've often said that, teaching a child not to step on a caterpillar, it may be as important to the child as it is to the caterpillar. Why do you think that our treatment of animals is fundamental to our aliveness and wholeness as humans?
I'm getting the question by my son in public. But they're good questions, and I appreciate them. I told you I didn't know what we were
going to do. And where were you on the night of the 14th?
I think how we treat animals says something about the kind of human beings we are. And I think it is, there's a loss that we don't even know we feel sometimes because of our alienation from the natural world. And animals are sometimes the ambassadors of that world and a reflection of our own natures and of our own inner worlds in some way. The native tribes would see animals as echoes or mirrors of different capacities that we have. And I think in our dreams that's still true. What I sense is that we have a kind of schizophrenic attitude towards animals in this society. Because on the one hand, schizoid may be the more accurate word, because on the one hand, we have companion animals. We call them pets. I prefer the term companion animals. But dogs and cats and other creatures, and we love them, most of us. And we pay their vet bills, and we buy their food, and we give them names, and they sleep on our beds often, and they're part of our families. And we love them, and they love us in return in their ways, and that reciprocal flow of heart energy is deeply empowering to us as people. It gives us something of our humanity. It's some of our most beautiful relationships, I think, sometimes take place with four-legged creatures or winged creatures. But then, as a society, we do something also. We draw a line, and we call some animals pets, and then we call other animals dinner or livestock. And we treat those animals very, very differently. And it's institutionalized. Every state in the United States, all 50, have laws against cruelty to animals. The laws vary from state to state, but one thing they have in common is that every single one of the 50 states exempts from said legislation animals destined for human consumption. If you are raising an animal for its milk or its flesh to eat or to sell to others to eat, you can do anything to that animal as long as it's considered customary farming practice, i.e., as long as it lowers the price per pound. Now, these people who run these operations don't wake up in the middle of the night thinking, how can I be cruel to animals? No, they're economic creatures. They wake up in the middle of the night thinking, how do I cut costs? And it just so happens that those practices and those methods that cut costs almost always end up being at the expense of the creatures and the animals and their well-being and their sanity and their health. And so we have developed a system of modern meat and dairy production that if you treated a dog or a cat that way, it would be a felony in most states. You would be put in prison for doing what is standard operating procedure in modern meat production. And I think that that is costing us something dearly. I don't think it's an accident, although I don't know how to explain it fully. But I don't think it's an accident that when we eat the products of factory farms, which are the flesh and the eggs and the milk from animals who have been treated with institutionalized, massive cruelty and indifference, unspeakable cruelty, really, that our incidence of heart disease increases. We get sick. I think it's a sickening system, frankly. And we need to address this and reacquaint ourselves with the possibility that our lives can be statements of, fully aligned with, expressions of our compassion, our heartfulness, our soulfulness, our responsiveness to life. And then we live with our respect for ourselves in a new way. Because we see in animals and in our treatment of them and our relationships with them something of the beauty of our souls rather than our indifference and our contempt.
Thank you. How many of you have learned something so far this weekend that has touched your life in some way? Okay. How many of you have people in your lives with whom you wish you could share this information? How many of you have sometimes felt frustrated watching people you love get sick and thinking that if they only knew what you know, maybe it would help? So as we gain new information, I think it carries with it some degree of responsibility. We carry a responsibility for what we do with that information in our lives, and we also become stewards of that information, in some ways on behalf of those we love. Because I think that everything we learn and everything we experience in life is not just ours alone. It obviously impacts our family members. It impacts perhaps everyone we interact with in some way. And so the question that so many of us deal with is, when do you speak and when do you just unconditionally love and accept people? When will sharing what you know or what you're passionate about really change somebody's life? And when will it alienate them and make them think you're another one of those rabid, crazy people who wants to change them? You know, vegetarians and vegans don't always have the best reputation because sometimes there's this belief that they're always out to proselytize and change everybody else, that they feel holier than thou and superior or more vegan than thou. And so a lot of people are kind of resistant to that stuff, right? At the same time, when you have information, when you have the power that comes with that information, you want to share it because you love people and because you care about them and because you want to manifest that, right? Can you relate to what I'm talking about? So I wish I could give you a 1, 2, 3 step formula and solve that question for you, but I want to raise it more than answer it, because I think it is so important. What do we do with this information? How do we manifest what we love in the world around us? And I think we've been talking about this a lot recently. I'm going to share a few things, and then I'm going to invite my dad to add more to it. Some of the things that are obvious to me. One is, we teach best by example. If you are living what you believe in, and you are loving your relationship with food, and you are loving your vitality, that's going to send out an impact, right? So number one is just the simple embodiment of your own experience. The more you can be liberated from the cultural trance and be awakened to your own courage and your own capacity to live your values, that in itself will send out ripples and make a difference in the lives of those around you. Another thing I think is that Dr. King said it quite beautifully, Dr. Martin Luther King. He said, "You have no moral authority with those who can feel your underlying contempt." So when we're holding contempt for other people, we lose moral standing in that relationship. I think we'll be most effective if we connect with the Spirit, we connect with the love, we connect with the compassion that we've carried for people, and really know that if this person is going to awaken to something, it's going to come from them, right? So we can provide the environment that supports that. But what sprouts in this human being is theirs. We can support that. We can affirm that. We can celebrate that people generally want to be healthy. People generally want to make a difference. People are generally abhorred by horrible cruelty to animals. We don't want to participate in those systems. So how can we stand with the goodness and the integrity and the beauty in the human beings around us? And from that relationship, we can build connection and perhaps the capacity to influence in positive ways. So these are a few of the principles that are alive for me right now. And I'd love to hear if you want to add to that.
Thank you, Ocean. Well, I relate to those questions about people. There's somebody in my life right now, as a matter of fact, who I love very dearly, a very close friend, who has diabetes, he's overweight, he's got high cholesterol, he's got high blood pressure. He's taking drugs for all of those things. And it's serious. And I love him, and he's got me in his life. And up until very recently, anyway, he's not been very open to changing anything. He's willing to talk about it. He's willing even to agree with me about some things. But somehow it doesn't show up, doesn't manifest in his case. And so I've started to, there's a saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And I've been passive, I think, too passive in that relationship, because I've been being a space for him. I've been validating his feelings, and I've been leading him to the water and watching him not drink. And lately, I've just been frustrated enough that I'm changing my actions with him. And with his permission, I keep asking him, is it okay with you? Because I would like to, basically, in a nutshell, kick him into the water and get a bucket and throw it in his face. Maybe I can't make him drink, but I'm going to do what I can. I'm not willing to be acquiescent to his acquiescence. I'm not willing to be resigned to his resignation. I'm going to be active. He'll do what he does. I may or may not be successful, but I am going to know if I'm not successful that I gave it everything I could, because I love him. And I keep telling him that. I'm doing this because I love you, and I want you to have all the support that you need to make the healthiest choices and have the healthiest possible life in the years to come, whatever has happened before. And I keep thanking him for the changes that I see that he is making. They're pretty small so far, but I still am saying, appreciate that. That's a step in the right direction. And he's watched Forks Over Knives 3 times now because I've made him. And I gave him the Forks Over Knives cookbook, and I'm basically doing what I can. And I don't know how that's going to work out. He will make the choices he makes. But at least I know that I love him, and I'm translating that love into an active force now. And I don't know. Sometimes you have to discern who are the people that are open. Because if you waste your energy on the wrong people, you won't have it left over for the people who are more sensitive to what you're about, who are more receptive to what you have to communicate, who are ready. And so you have to be discerning. I ask. I've learned to ask. So with him, I keep asking him, is it okay with you if I keep pummeling you with information? Is it okay? He says, yes, yes. I get his buy-in that way. I remember once being in a restaurant, and there was a woman in the next booth, and she had a fur coat on. And, big mink thing. And I was like, she was obviously proud of it, the way, and I could just not say anything, but I decided to be
He's not
obnoxious.
the type.
I decided to be a little bit obnoxious, and I said, "Excuse me, ma'am. I see that's quite a mink coat you've got there." She said, "Oh, yes, indeed." And I said, "Would you like to know how I feel when I see it?" And she caught it right then. She knew exactly what I would have said if she let me, and she said, "No," because she felt. And I said, thank you for being honest with me. You know, I'm sure you'll be more compassionate in the future." And she was like, what? I thought it was an effective thing to do. I thought, you know, some of we can all get caught up in vanity and indulgence. And, you know, I try to ask people, what if we looked at our food choices, our food reality, our food world as a mirror? What do you see in that mirror? Do you see self-respect? Do you see your love operating and growing? Or do you see indulgence and convenience and compromises that grow increasingly destructive and deteriorative to you? Do you see someone who's willing to be themselves, or do you see someone who's basically selling out to a culture that's deeply out of phase with who we need to be? And when you look in the mirror, do you blame that person for what you see? Or can you be accountable? Because I think guilt is not a good motivator. Sometimes it is, but basically I don't like it. I try and throw guilt out the window and try and see where accountability is, responsibility is, and opportunity is. And so I try and work with, when I'm interacting with people, I want them to know first and foremost that I love them, that I respect their right to make the choices they make, that I respect their autonomy, their authenticity as an individual, that I'm there not to impose, but to awaken, to evoke, to love, to invite. And I've seen that it can take a long time. And Ocean referred to my dad, and it is an amazing story. And for those of you who don't know, my dad was the founder and co-owner of Baskin Robbins, 31 Flavors, which became the world's largest ice cream company, billion-dollar company, multi-billion-dollar company. And I'm his only son, and I was groomed to succeed him. It was his plan that I would run the company, and I was trained to do that. I invented flavors. I invented Jamoke almond fudge. I grew up in a very weird way. We had an ice cream cone-shaped swimming pool in our backyard. We had ice cream for breakfast. It was bizarre. And then my uncle, Bert Baskin, my dad's partner and brother-in-law, died of a heart attack at the age of 54. Young man, big man, who ate a lot of ice cream. And I asked my dad, do you think there might be a connection between the amount of ice cream he'd eat and his fatal heart attack in his early 50s? And my dad said, absolutely not. His ticker just got tired and stopped working. And his message to me was, there is no connection between ice cream and heart disease. There is no connection between diet and health, and don't you ever mention that again. So it was like the elephant in the room that in this family I grew up in, you could not talk about. So I left, so I could talk about it. And I left, and I disappointed him, and I probably in some ways he felt betrayed by me, because I walked away from everything he planned for me, and the money as well. And I told him, I just don't want to follow in that path that you have created for me. And I'm sure he was really angry, because he made that clear, and he probably thought, I've got the only kid in the country that would turn this down. He'd worked very hard. He'd achieved a level of financial success that is most people can only dream about. And he wants to share it. He wants to give it to his son. It's weird. But over the years, I loved him, and it meant keeping it distant. It meant not arguing anymore, because he'd want to fight, he'd want to argue, and I'd just back away from it. I would just back away from it, because there's no point in it. It would just recirculate in a repetitive way. And then as the years went by, his own health began to be a very significant problem. And he developed very, very serious diabetes. And his weight was out of control. And he had high cholesterol, and he had high blood pressure, and he was on all these meds. And his cardiologist finally told him in 1989 that he said to him, "Mr. Robbins, you're a very sick man, and the best we can do for you now is try to juggle your medications, try to control some of the side effects that are bothering you, and try to make your few remaining years a little more comfortable." And then he said to him, "On the other hand, if you are willing to make major changes in the way that you live, there might be a different prognosis." And my father said, "What do you mean, major changes?" And this physician reached behind him and took a book and said, "I think you should read this book." And it was Diet for a New America. And you know, my dad already had a copy, an autographed one. I'd sent it to him when it was first published, but he hadn't read it. He didn't want to hear from his maverick son who'd rejected his life work. Except now, the high priest of Western medicine is telling him he should read the book. And so he did. And he began to make changes, and he made more changes, and then more changes. And about 3 years later, his diabetes was in complete remission. He no longer needed insulin or diabetic pills. His blood sugar levels had completely normalized. His blood pressure had come down so beautifully that he no longer needed any of the, what he called horse pills, that they had told him he'd have to take for the rest of his life. His cholesterol had come down 100 points to a very healthy number. His LDL was way down. He'd lost 60 pounds that he needed to lose. And he called me up. He said, "Johnny, it's incredible. It's unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. Who would have thought this was possible?" "What, Dad?" "Well, it turns out you were right." And he lived another 16 years, most of them very, very healthy ones. He died in 2008, but in his 90s, and Ocean referred to us being there with him, and it was a beautiful, it was heartbreaking because he's dying, but it was beautiful. He was in his 90s. His life was complete, and so there was a beauty as well. And at one moment when I was with him, he was in a lot of pain, laying there, and he had a device that he could push something, and it would inject intravenous morphine, but it would only do so every 15 minutes. I guess they were afraid he might get addicted. I don't know. No, I think actually they were afraid he would go into a coma and not come back, but that was actually going to take place at some point. And he didn't. When he'd first get the injection of the morphine, he'd feel better. You could see his face relax, and then as the 15 minutes went along, before he'd be pushing it, but it wouldn't deliver, and he'd become very stressed. And I said to him, "Less pain, less pain." He said, "Yeah, less pain." And I said, "And more love." And he said, "Huh?" And I said, "Less pain, more love." And he said, "Less pain." And I said, "More love." And I just began sort of saying a mantra like, "Less pain, more love. Less pain, more love." I was just saying this. And he's kind of going in and out of consciousness and falling asleep, and it's hard to tell sometimes. And every once in a while he'd kind of look at me and say, "Less pain." And I'd say, "Yeah, and more love." And then at a certain point, he I don't know if he was asleep or what, but I kissed his forehead. I just had a feeling to do this, and very gently kissed his forehead. And somewhat to my dismay, it scared him. And he went like this and said, what was that? What was that? What was that?" And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Dad, to disturb you. I just kissed your forehead." He said, why? And I said, well, I'm feeling a lot of love for you, and it was my way of expressing it. He said, oh. And then he closed his eyes, and a moment later, I just felt like doing that again. So I did. I went over and just kissed his forehead, and this time his face broke onto a big smile. And I said, less pain, and he said, more love. Then he said, there sure is a lot of love here right now. And I said, less pain. And he said, more love. And then he looked at me and said, you've always been about love, haven't you? He said, I didn't believe in it. He said, I thought it was just malarkey. He said, it's got to be practical. And he said, I was actually cruel. And I said, yeah. And he said, but I regret that, and thank God some of us have lived long enough to learn new things. And I said, yeah. And I said, I love you, Dad. And he said, well, I love you too. And I think that's the first time I'd ever heard him say that. And then I went back into my mantra, less pain, more love, less pain, more love. And he just smiled and closed his eyes, and he died a few hours later. And I got to experience that this guy who wasn't about love, believe me. It wasn't what his life was about. He was about money and ice cream and status and Rolls Royces and certain cultural belief system that we have, and fear. And I found that if I just held my space, I was true to myself, and I didn't impose, I didn't inflict, but I just loved him. In some cases, that meant just backing away from the argument, backing away from the aggression, backing away from the violence, but holding a space for a possibility of connection, not knowing if it would happen. I did not know all those years that would end up the way it did. I did not know that. In fact, if I'd have bet otherwise, knowing him and knowing me, I surprised myself by being as caring as I ended up being with him. And I'm grateful that for that opportunity very much. And now when I meet people, like I have this friend I was telling you about, who I don't know if he's going to change anything, but I'm pestering him and I'm kicking him like a horse into the water and so forth. I have in me the sense of confidence that if we try to reach people while loving them, so we're horizontal, we're not coming from above or from below, and we're straight, we're leveling, then there is the chance. And I, for one, always want to take that chance, because so much is at stake. So much is here for us.
Thank you. How'd you like to have him for a dad? It's pretty cool. My wife and I have been married for 18 years now. And one of the things that I'm learning in marriage and relationship is about that being straight. And it's also about that sometimes when we do what we do for our own well-being, then that carries a different kind of impact than when we need the other person to change. In any relationship, if my belief system is, I will be miserable unless you change, I need you to be different, then we're really giving our power away, and we're not really taking responsibility for our choices. So one of the things that touched me as you were just sharing that story about your friend is that you reached a point where you really, as I was hearing it, you really felt like you needed to speak out. You needed to move that horse towards that water, whether or not it was going to drink, and then he'd do what he would do. And in a sense, you were moving then because it was your own integrity, your own spirit, your own wholeness and well-being that was at stake. And if we come from that place, then whatever other people do, however they respond, we will be in our own power, in our own center of gravity in that relationship. So with my beloved partner, sometimes, I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but sometimes she does things that aren't exactly what I wanted her to do. And it's a world of difference to communicate about that in a way that's like thinking that she has to change, or thinking that I will be more whole, more alive, more present, more authentic in this relationship if I speak what's my truth. That's the kind of horizontal relationship that I think can actually move hearts and touch lives. And now I spoke earlier about being a father, and I want to come back to that. Because my wife and I when we first became pregnant, we kind of thought about the legacy of this Robbins family and, Baskin Robbins and Diet for New America. And I was organizing peace rallies in elementary school and founding a major nonprofit at age 16. And we imagined that our kids would probably be saving the world by the time they were out of diapers. And then they were born very prematurely. They were in the hospital struggling to survive for a month and a half. And they were clearly very troubled. They turned blue so many times from lack of oxygen. They really had a rough start. And then they obviously have autism, as I shared earlier. So at 11 years old, they're still wearing pull-ups. And the journey with them has taught me so much about unconditional love and even about activism. You see, with autism, which now impacts about 1 in 80 kids in the United States, by the way, it's growing very, very fast. With autism, one of the things that we find is that the conventional treatment approach to autism is to try to modify behavior. So kids are given a very sophisticated and intentional system of rewards and punishments to try to train them so that they'll have better table manners, so that they'll greet strangers and be more polite, so that they'll behave better, right? Trouble is, generally speaking, they don't know how to build love and connection in that system. So we're using another approach. It's called the Sunrise program, SONRISE program. And it's all about building relationship and building connection with the child. It says that autism is fundamentally not a behavioral disorder, but a relational challenge. That autistic children are so overwhelmed with stimuli around them, and their brains don't know how to filter it and process it as easily as many people's do. And so they disconnect, and they go into exclusive, repetitive behaviors, ask the same questions over and over, do the same things over and over, as a way to try to cope with the world that feels overwhelming to them. So what we're learning about is that when we join them and love them the way they are and connect with them where they're at, we build connection that can actually transform relationship. I just want to give you one example. And I'm going to tie this back to what we're eating, I promise. So one day, our kid River, about a year ago, was chewing on a Barbie doll's foot, which is something he can do for long periods of time. He loves to chew on Barbie feet. And I was seeing him do that, and instead of worrying about the fact that this plastic was probably made in China and wondering what chemicals were leaching into his system, or wondering how he was ever going to have a dating life if he insisted on chewing on Barbie feet all the time, and yanking it out of his mouth, I decided to join him. So I sat across the room from him, and I pick up a Barbie doll, and I start chewing on her foot. And I decided I wasn't just mocking him, I was getting into it. I was like, I wanted to find out what richness and beauty was in this sensory experience. So I'm sitting there chewing on a Barbie foot. Now at this point, River's 10 years old. He had never made eye contact with me. I mean, never for more than a couple fleeting seconds. We'd never really looked in each other's eyes his entire life. But at that moment, at the age of 10, River looks up at me. And this huge smile comes over his face. He's totally beaming, looking straight in my eyes, and I could totally hear him thinking, he finally figured it out. There is intelligent life on this planet. Because we were connected, right? I was joining him in his world. So then we're beaming in each other's eyes for quite a while, and then River goes like this. Turns out his Barbie has 2 feet. So he's inviting me to come over and chew on the other foot of his Barbie doll. So I come over, now we're 3 inches apart, beaming in each other's eyes, with radiant smiles on our faces, chewing on Barbie feet. And I was so happy, because I was in contact with my son. I felt like I was connected to his soul. So in the year and a half that we've been doing this program, we've watched eye contact levels increase 30-fold. We've watched violent outbursts drop 95%. We've watched our kids ask questions and show empathy in ways that all these experts have told us they are incapable of doing. They are connecting, they are loving life, they are interested in people in ways that we never thought were possible, that our autistic kids just aren't supposed to do. And I don't know what their future holds. We're watching miracles unfold, and I'm inspired about it, and I don't know how far the miracle's going to stretch. But I'll tell you this, the opportunity to have love and connection with my children has been changing my life and adding so much joy to our home, and I'm so grateful for it. So what does this have to do with food and how we communicate to the people around us? I think quite a bit. Because when we stand in our integrity and hold love and compassion and empathy for those around us, they can feel it. That is a transmission that reaches the heart. And I don't think that, we need the data, we need the information, we need the statistics, absolutely. But I don't think that's enough. I think that the heart and the spirit and the love that we carry is what will also help us to be agents of change and healing and transformation in this world. Because we're not just logical creatures. We may think that we're logical, but a lot of times what really moves us is emotion. It's feeling. We want to feel good. We want to feel happy. We want to feel fulfilled. And all the right rules in the world are not going to really motivate us, especially to change deeply entrenched habits, if we aren't moved from inside of our own hearts and spirits. And when we live in a place of love and aliveness and joy, I think people can feel that. Harold Thurman Whitman said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." Now, I think we also want to be in relationship to the world's needs. That's what makes me come alive, honestly, is when I feel connected. A connection between my spirit, my values, my actions, and the world around me. That brings me joy and aliveness. But the more we can be beacons of that power and that passion and that beauty that lives in our own hearts and bring that and manifest that in the world, therein, I think, lies our capacity to be agents of change and healing and transformation.
Thank you, Osha. Maybe we'll take some questions now and respond. Is there a way to do that? Hi, Sabrina's got a mic. There's someone with someone with a hand up.
Hello. I promise to be appropriate. Hi, John. I have an ethical vegan question, and I figure you're the best person to answer because you're the guy we look to for ethics. I've been vegan for 36 years, and I'm also a person who likes to share her life with companion animals, specifically dogs and cats, and I always rescue them as adults from the shelter, which means their dietary habits are pretty much formed. I know there are wonderful vegan dog and cat foods out there, but I've never been lucky enough to have a companion animal that is willing to eat them without the inclusion of a very small amount of animal products. And the longer I'm vegan, the more I struggle with this dilemma that I'm contributing to the suffering of another creature so that my creature can have a healthy and joyous life. So my question is, how do I reconcile that? And the second question is, how do I deal with all the hate emails I get from animal rights vegans because I admit to doing this? Again, I'm not going to lie about it because people will see me, buying it. So how do I deal with it within myself, and how do I deal with all the AR vegans that literally send me hate emails because I'm considered a prominent vegan in my world, and how dare I do this?
I have 2 choice words for people who send you hate mail, but I can't repeat it.
Well, I struggle with the very same thing. In fact, on the drive over here from the airport, we were talking about this, and I've had cats in my home for 40 years, obviously a series of them. I love them dearly, and I'm I've also never had a cat that was willing to eat veggie cat food, and I've tried, and I struggle with it too. What I do know is that the world doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful, that there are compromises that we make. Either way, I may not have any more cats when these cats pass on. I haven't decided fully yet, but that's where I'm leaning. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry to hear that you've received hate mail, hate messages. There's no good in that. And I have two. I will share with you just one instance of it. It was shortly after Diet for New America came out. In Diet for New America, there are over 1,000 citations from the medical literature, from peer-reviewed scientific journals. 3 of them reference animal experiments. In all 3 cases in the text of the book, in the actual book, I describe those experiments and say I don't ethically condone them. But they did take place, and they did affect. They had an impact on what I was describing, which was the history of our understanding of cholesterol and heart disease. So I mentioned them. There was an animal rights group, I won't mention the name of it because it doesn't really matter, but they were irate at me for, as they put it, validating animal research and giving it credibility. And we could differ about that, but what happened was I was doing an event in Vancouver, BC, a very large event. There were probably 1,800, 2,000 people there. And I took questions, and one of them was there, and they said, you know, there was a lot of hate came out of them about this, and then they said, and we know where your son goes to school, and we know what buses he takes, and they named the bus number, and they had it right. And I'm in Vancouver, and we live in Santa Cruz, and Ocean at the time was
probably 13 or
13 or 14 years old, and he's taking buses to get to school, and they're threatening his life. And they said if I didn't recant, if I didn't take them out, have the books destroyed and reprint them without that in it, one day Ocean wasn't going to come home from school. And I don't know, my heart just jumped into my head at that point. It was just so frightened, you know, because they did actually named his bus route, and they had it right. They had done this research. It was like, what was I to do at that moment? What happened in the room was very intense. A lot of people were very upset with these people for making that threat, and it ended up being the police came in and took these people away for making these threats. But I was left with, well, I don't know what's going to happen. And I just felt like, why is it that in the name of compassion we can be so uncompassionate? In the name of creating a better world and a more loving world, we can be so mean. And I know the frustration that we can feel in the face of so much cruelty, and we want to do something about it, but we have to work on ourselves so we don't become what we hate, what we're opposing. We have to work on ourselves, transform, do this inner work so that we don't just reflect the violence in another way, but actually transform it. And anger, because these people were very angry. I'm imagining the people that are communicating with you are very angry. I've been very angry. But what I try to do with my anger is mature it. Mature with it. In other words, I think anger actually is the warrior spirit in infantile form. And if it grows up, if we grow up, if we become capable of that force and that power, but not in a way that's reactive and complicit in the violence, but in a way that upholds and stands for and affirms the capacity that is in every one of us to befriend life. then I think we're on track. So I don't have an answer for you about your companion animals, because I'd wrestle with it also. But I do want us to grow up. Thanks.
I think we can
Looks
take...
like we have time for about one more question, and then we'll need to wrap up this segment.
Thank you. I live in Argentina part of the year, and it's the capital meat-eating country in the world. And yet, I find the people there so kind and so giving and so serving, often much more than my vegetarian community. How do you explain that?
An easy one for your last question.
I think, as we've clearly seen demonstrated with these last couple questions, you can be right and not be righteous. You can be a vegan who consumes no honey and wears no leather, and you can be mean to people all around you. Or you can be passionate and you can be loving and kind and gentle. I think that we can clearly see that what we eat has an impact on us and how we relate to other people, but it's not the whole story. And if VegSource and if healthy lifestyle is to you about more than just what's on your plate, if it's also about how you live and how you interact with the world around you, then clearly I would suggest love has to come into the equation as well. To me, the food that I eat is an expression of the love that I want to live and bring in the world. And I want to live in a way that brings more love and less pain.
And I think you all do too. Want to live in a way that brings more love and less pain. And I thank you for that. I want to acknowledge you for that. And I want to acknowledge also that by being here and learning and growing and listening to yourself, as well as the speakers, listening to what you think and feel in response to the information, in response to the input, something is taking place that will have consequences that will be thrilling, will be brilliant, will bring out the genius in you. The unique type of genius that you are, that you carry, that you were born with, that is unlike anyone else's. And the path that VegSource represents, and that this conference so magnificently, in my opinion, transmits. It's a path that will lead always into the great light. The light of our capacities as human beings to live honorably, to live decently, and to live beautifully on this earth. And we live in a time in which there's so much breakdown. The species are becoming extinct at a rapacious rate. There are so many ways in which our society and our environment are on the verge of, and in some cases actually experiencing, collapse. The life support systems are under tremendous stress. Each of us feels this. We are part of the planetary reality. And to be given the insight into a step that we can take that is healing for us, that gives us a stronger immune system and less susceptibility to infectious disease. It gives us a stronger cardiovascular system and less vulnerability to cardiovascular diseases. That lowers our rates of cancer, increases our longevity, increases our vitality, increases our cognitive capacity, so we're less inclined as we age to dementia and other problems. And to understand that same diet, those same steps also are kindest to the other creatures, and allow the most other human beings to be fed. and are the least polluting and produce the least amount of greenhouse gas emissions. We have been given something here. You have been given something here, precious. And I, for one, am deeply grateful to Jeff and Sabrina for the work that they've done to make this possible, and to each of you for being here and lending your presence and your attention and your energy and your joy to this creative